Hey guys, Forristicat here. It's been a while since I posted a video on talkbackworld.net. Just been busy with a few things, some sort of living rearrangements. But nevertheless, I knew like the next video I was going to record was going to be on the James Bond film Skyfall. There's a couple of other videos I want to do, like The Walking Dead wrap up when I think the next episode airs tomorrow, and Homeland, but I got to catch up on season 2 for that. But yeah, nevertheless, just got back from seeing Skyfall, so I realised it's been out in the UK for a month or something like this. But nevertheless, I was sort of keen to see what all this hype was about. I mean, there was a guy at work talking about it a lot. You've got the media saying it's the best James Bond film ever, which I don't believe by default. But I wanted to sort of, see it with my own eyes and give my own sort of thoughts on, what made Skyfall good and what made Skyfall bad. So overall, it goes without saying that the director, I think Mark Forster, for once we get to see some proper camera shots. I mean, Quantum of Solace was a total disaster zone. So just having the sort of camera shots still, so we can actually see what's going on by default, that automatically makes it better. So hard to sort of watch the movie if you can't watch the movie. Furthermore, this is going to be very stream of consciousness. I mean, as you know, most of my reviews are just off the top of my head, so this is also off the top of my head. There was a number of longer shots, and it sort of reminded me of the Alfred Hitchcock movie Row Pow. There were so many like long takes in that, and that sort of really immerses you into the movie experience. One of the scenes I remember was the fighting scene, like on top of the Shanghai Tower. You got like all the blue sort of like silhouettes in the background, and you have like James Bond or whoever is a stunt double, like fighting that guy there, and you see him fight for like quite a long time without the camera shot panning away. And the other noticeable example was when our villain was walking slowly towards James Bond, and you get the over the top shoulder view, which is really good for interrogation scenes where the director wants to put you in the perspective of the character. And unless there was some sort of trickery I wasn't aware of, it looked like that was just a one-shot take as he's slowly walking towards James Bond and delivers the infamous "Mummy was very bad" line, which we've seen in the trailers and it's actually in the movie. So that was pretty good. And that leads me to the next point, that, and I've mentioned this before in other reviews, that you have to have your downtime moments to have your uptime moments. And this was done in Casino Royale, as was mentioned. Like, it was very ballsy to have this sort of like quiet psychological card game in the middle of what is normally like a very sort of action-packed movie to begin with, being James Bond. And it did feel like this movie had its sort of moments like that as well. Like you saw, the whole thing, the whole fight at Skyfall right at the end, where you sort of like have just M and James Bond just sitting there by themselves, sort of in silence. This is something that is refreshing to see from a James Bond film. And God forbid we actually learn a bit about the James Bond character, and this is something where it was all like inferred from recent sort of James Bond films. Like, well, you sort of like, you get to see like the end result of him like doing all this James Bond stuff, but we haven't yet had many scenes where he's actually like revealing, like not that he's like a very revealing character, but like at least we got from different characters like stories of what happened to him as a kid, when he was in the bunker and he was there for 2 days and he came out a different man. This always this adds stuff to the depth of his character, and we sort of didn't get much characterization of James Bond before, whereas in this movie Skyfall it really feels like we're getting to know him more, about what makes him tick, his parents being killed, and sort of how he dealt with that being an orphan. So that was very well done. The plot. Now the plot is an interesting double-edged sword. Normally James Bond plots I find are sort of complicated, bouncing around all over the place, from organisation to terrorist to Interpol to this CIA, blah blah blah, whatever. This plot was like pretty simple and easy to follow. Now that's a good thing in that like it helps people sort of like have their mental capacity for what's going on screen. But at the same time, you don't have that sort of like real sort of power rush that you would have if you sort of like made like a really sort of complicated plot which was executed well. So it was simplistic, but that sort of like as good as the simple plot was, you know, that it took away from the potential of, you know, having like a really well written script. But nevertheless, like it I must say, like, it did work being like a simpler script. Like, it was very easy to follow. Like, okay, this guy's publishing stuff to YouTube, okay, that's bad, okay, MI6 has been infiltrated, that has to be stopped. So it was very easy to sort of keep track of, more than other James Bond films, in my opinion, story-wise. Also, this Bond movie felt a little bit more grounded in reality. What a couple of examples where James Bond sort of gets on the subway train and like, the subway, and he's like open the door to like that woman, and she's like staring with like wide eyes, going, "What the hell is going on?" Now, if that happened in real life, of course, that's how someone normally would react. So it had like little sprinklings of stuff like that, which sort of made the Bond film feel more realistic. Another example was just a simple addition of a news report, like having an authentic news report, like Sky News or whatever, with all the scrolling things. The news reporter gave a pretty good job, and sort of talking about the attacks. And you know, we've seen, if you watch a little bit of news, then you know what that is, and it sort of like felt like, yeah, this is happening for real, which add to the realism of the movie, which added to my enjoyment of the movie. Also, you know, for better or for worse, it's interesting seeing social media, like namely YouTube here, being used as sort of like a front for you know, uploading all the informations of these, you know, like double agents or whatever. So that sort of like was interesting and different. I think it did help sort of like, once again, you know, ground the plot in you know, in reality a little bit, sort of like made the sort of whole James Bond thing more realistic, if that makes sense. The villain, I mean, there were rumors, I remember reading on like Ain't Too Cool News like a while ago that, yeah, Javier Bardem was going to be the villain. I didn't think that would happen, but yeah, he was like as a gay villain nevertheless, so that was interesting to take that angle. And it was an interesting throwback to Jaws, I felt, with, you know, him removing his teeth and sort of like his face sagging a lot, but maybe a little bit too obvious reference. But no, actually, on second thoughts, yeah, it's an okay reference. That was pretty cool. And of course, you know, the whole like old Jaguar style, and like the real James Bond music sort of kicking in as he, you know, he's like, you know, we gotta go back to the past, and he drives away in the car and stuff like that. It was very interesting to sort of, I guess, see more of M's character, but unfortunately it was very predictable that she was going to die. You know, there were a couple of predictable things. Number one, you know, everyone knows that that villain, once he's in that sort of enclosed capsule or whatever, you know he's going to escape, because obviously there's no point sort of like introducing the villain and then just having a couple of scenes with him on that island, and then sort of that's the end of that villain. So it's like, okay, how is he going to escape next? Also, yeah, like I said, like M dying was very predictable. It's like, okay, this is a different sort of movie. They're focusing on M and James Bond relationship. Why are they doing this? Okay, chances are she's going to die. I thought she was going to die in the call room, but that did not happen. It happened, of course, later on. What else? What didn't I like about the whole island sequence? Felt like just how he killed that girl that James Bond had a thing for. I think he killed her. It was pretty unclear, and it sort of didn't deal with. It sort of wrapped it up pretty quickly without sort of addressing, you know, how James Bond dealt with that. Like usually, I don't know. It'd be nice to have a bit of closure on his relationship with that character, because I think she was a pretty good character. It sort of just went. He's like showing his radio, and yeah, the helicopters came in, and that was the end of that. Yeah, I guess the other thing I wanted to say was that it felt like the whole motivation behind, you know, this villain was not very clear, and I guess the best way I can describe it is like half-baked ideas. But the thing is, the ideas in this movie were actually very good. It just they needed to be fleshed out a little bit more. But you know, I'm not going to complain. Why? Well, this is obviously like a huge improvement on Quantum of Solace, because it was such a disaster zone, and it's an interesting take to see James Bond down and out for once. You know, like an alcoholic and stuff like this, and having to, you know, retrain himself. So it was an interesting take. There was not sort of as many action sequences, but you know, like once again, like the whole like Skyfall fight at the end, like felt like a like a western or something like that, like having this mini war. I thought that was very sort of interesting to do, like to do something different. Normally, like, you know, it's in like some popular area, there's, you know, like balls to the wall action, but this was like something a little bit different, and I felt like it worked well. The whole, you know, like opening action sequence, great. The song Skyfall by Adele was fantastic. I particularly like the opening cinematic. I mean, they always continue to impress with sort of like, you know, the redness and like the death, and seeing him like trying to fight his own shadows, like he becomes his own worst enemy and stuff like that. That was also very great. What else can we say about this movie? I guess the trailer, once again, unfortunately, you know, spliced together scenes in a way that made this movie seem like it was going to be better than what it actually was. I think the whole thing at the end where, you know, like they end up in a church and he's like, how fitting is this? I think that is a little bit too cliche. Like as soon as like James Bond said, you know, okay, go down to the church or abbey or whatever, it's like, okay, here we go again, you know, the age-old trope of resolution for your sins. Let's have the final scene and the shootout, and him holding her there in the church. I mean, I can understand why they did it, but it just felt a little bit overplayed, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. It didn't feel sort of like natural. It seemed like too much of an obvious thing to do. I'm not sure how they could have executed that better. And the ending, I mean, the ending wasn't that great either. I mean, it seemed like, it's like, yeah, you ready to do more work? Yeah, my pleasure. It's just, I didn't sort of really like those lines. But overall, I have to say that, yeah, this movie was, it's about more, it sounds like I'm complaining about now, but just purely from the fact that we could actually see what was going on, we get to know more about James Bond history and, you know, past, and like flesh out his character a little bit more. That was great. And getting to see him from a different angle, like, you know, seeing like I said, he's an alcoholic, he's sort of, you know, sleeping around, just, you know, enjoying death or whatever, and sort of like seeing him, you know, having to get back in the game. That was also an interesting perspective. Although it would be nice to, I guess, have seen more sort of how he actually got better slowly over time, and maybe they just didn't have time for that. So overall, yeah, if I give it a score out of 10, I would give it a 7 out of 10, I guess. I mean, definitely an improvement on Quantum of Solace, but it did feel like it needed some like more sort of like better execution of the ideas, namely like I don't know, I guess you can't have your cake and eat it too. Like I would have liked to have seen some more like global sort of consequences, but, and maybe it's because I feel like the best James Bond movies have sort of like worldwide implications, but having said that, you know, this was like a more personal story of James Bond and M, and sort of like like him as a person, and like the whole, the villain also like being like a former agent. They didn't really explore that well. But, you know, overall, like, yeah, definitely improvement. I think, like, you know, the writers of this like are actually starting to use their brains, so I can understand why they want to have these scenes differently done. And just, you know, going to Scotland for the finale and having like a mini war there was also very good. But yeah, I think, you know, Daniel Craig should do one more James Bond movie, then it should move on to the next. I still can't buy the whole, number one, actually I was having a discussion with my friend, you know, James Bond is not a bodybuilder. Like, he needs to be thin and like sort of fit, but not like Johnny Bravo or something like that. I think he needs to be like slender, but not like all muscly like that. That sort of, I don't know, sort of takes away from who I think of him as a character a little bit. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like, is James Bond meant to be that muscly? I'm not too sure about that. And yeah, the main thing is like this is one of my things. Like, he should not have blonde hair and blue eyes. That's just not James Bond. James Bond should have dark hair and dark eyes to go with his dark tuxedo. But, you know, with all of that, definitely steps in the right direction for the James Bond character. I would give it 7.5 out of 10. Definitely needed a little bit more better written plot to sort of string together why the villain was doing the things that he was doing. But yeah, like I said, it was nice to sort of actually, you know, God forbid, actually learn a little bit about the James Bond character. Interesting seeing like a gay villain for once. That was an interesting take. I'm not sure if that was done before in Bond history. I'm not really like a like Bond, connoisseur or whatever. I haven't watched all the movies. But yeah, like you had your decent action sequences there. Hate to talk about special effects, but I'm like analyzing these movies more and more. Like I could tell, like when they're driving through the marketplace, I could tell like the people were fake, this, that, and the other. But like that's the main things I have to say. Hey, like a little bit too much half-baked ideas for what otherwise is good steps, or are good steps in the right direction for the James Bond franchise. So that sort of got rid of my bitter taste in my mouth from Quantum of Solace. So overall, good job, Rise. You get a 7.5 out of 10 for me. And I look forward to what's next on the plate for 007. That's all from me. Thank you.